a general election was held in Mexico on Sunday, July 2, 2006. Voters went to the polls to elect, on the federal level, a new president of the republic to serve a 6-year term, replacing then Mexican President Vicente Fox, 500 members to serve for a 3-year term in the Chamber of Deputies, 128 members to serve 6-year terms in the Senate. In each state, 2 first-past-the-post seats are allocated to the party with the largest share of the vote, and the remaining seat is given to the first runner-up. Several local ballots were also held on the same day, most notably, the election of a new head of government and new legislative assembly of the federal district. C. 2006 Mexican federal district election. Gubernatorial elections in the states of Guanajuato, Jalisco and Morelos. Municipal and local congressional elections in those 3 states and in Campeche, Colima, Nuevo León, Querétaro, and Sonora. San Luis Potosí also elected a new local Congress. Presidential election. On September 5, 2006, Felipe Caldera Cubden Hinojosa was declared president-elect by the Federal Electoral Tribunal after a highly controversial post-electoral process. 8 political parties participated in the 2006 presidential election. 5 of them joined forces in 2 different electoral coalitions. Competition was intense, with the National Action Party eager to hold on to the presidency for a second period, the Institutional Revolutionary Party equally keen to regain the office it lost in the 2000 election for the first time in 71 years, and the Party of the Democratic Revolution believing itself to have a good chance to win after disappointments in the 2 previous elections. Preliminary results. On July 6, 2006, the Federal Electoral Institute announced the final vote count in the 2006 presidential election, resulting in a narrow margin of 0.58 percentage points of victory for Felipe Caldera Cubden Hinojosa. Calderon's victory was confirmed by the federal courts on September 5, 2006, and he was declared president-elect of Mexico. However, André copywriter Manuel La Cubed Pez Obrador, and his party, alleged irregularities in over 30% of the country's polling stations, and still after an unsuccessful judicial appeal of election results the PRD continued to call for street protests. Details. Quick count. The IFE declared at 11 p.m. on July 2, 2006 that the statistics yielded by the official quick count indicated that the presidential election was too close to call, meaning that the difference between the 2 frontrunners was smaller than their margin of error, or 0.3% of the vote. The IFE further declared that the official count, which began on Wednesday, July 5, 2006, was to determine which candidate will be recognized as president-elect. Nevertheless, front-running presidential candidates Felipe Caldera Cubden Hinojosa and André copywriter Manuel La Cubed Pez Obrador declared themselves the winners, basing their speeches on a number of private exit polls, some quoted and some not quoted, that gave a lead within the margin of error. PAN Chairman Manuel Espino Barrientos requested that IFE declare a winner by the night of July 3, 2006. Preliminary results clearly showed that PRIPVEM candidate Roberto Madrazo did not have a realistic chance of winning the presidency. Those results also showed that the smaller parties would retain their registration. The so-called foreign vote, whereby for the first time Mexican citizens living abroad were allowed to vote, albeit solely in the presidential contest, totaled only slightly more than 32,000 voters. The overall turnout for this election was approximately 59% of the eligible voters. Preliminary Electoral Results Program. The Preliminary Electoral Results Program is mandated by law to provide a quick estimate of the electoral results, but it has no authority to determine the outcome of the election. This point was made repeatedly by IFE President Ugalde in his official statements as the 2006 electoral process unfolded. The use of the PREP has been criticized because its data has been used by one candidate to proclaim his victory and by the other as supposed evidence of fraud. However, the PREP tends to predict the winner accurately when the difference between candidates is more than 1%. IFE Information Coordinator Rena Copyright Miranda dismissed PRD allegations that the changes in PREP's numbers were statistically improbable, saying the PREP was used objectively and impartially to reflect the reality of the country. Official count. After the PREP was concluded on July 4, the official district-based counts were begun on Wednesday, 5 July 2006. In accordance with the Federal Code of Electoral Procedures and Institutions, each of Mexico's 300 congressional districts tabulated the votes recorded on the tally sheets for each voting precinct in their district. In some cases, such as when a tally sheet was illegible, the sealed ballot packets were opened and recounted. All under the eyes of any election observers that any political party cared to provide. The district committee results, along with the ballots, were then transferred to the IFE in Mexico City, which resulted in the running totals shown below. Early returns favored La Cubed Pez Obrador, but by 0407 Mexico City time, Caldera Cubeden overtook him. By 0745, Caldera Cubeden was leading by approximately 0.33% of the vote. The volatility in the vote count was not unexpected. From the beginning, the IFE stated that running totals should not be construed as a trend, and that the official result would be released only when all polling stations had been counted. Several northern states, which strongly favored the PAN party in the PREP results, were slow in counting their ballots. This delay was at least partially attributable to the double-checking of district station totals with the actual ballot counts, that any political party may ask for under Mexican law. On July 6, having narrowly lost the preliminary official count, La Cubed Pez Obrador declared his intent to challenge the results before the Federal Electoral Tribunal, and demand a full recount of all ballots in Mexico City. On July 8, his supporters met at Mexico City's Czar Cubed Carlos Square to start what Obrador called the defense of the popular vote. The PRD also made a presentation on alleged election irregularities, including allegations that around 7 p.m., the IFE's running scoreboard vote tally blinked 0 for all candidates for a period of 4 minutes. The election-inspired protests were largely peaceful, and according to former IFE President Jose Copyright Woldenberg, well within the law. However, some unions and PRD supporters called for civil resistance if the courts decided to ratify Caldera Cubeden's victory. Some, like editorialist Armando Fuentes Aguirre, expressed concern that this could lead to armed conflict. On September 5, 2006, the Federal Electoral Court declared Caldera Cubeden the definitive winner. The final vote tally of the top two candidates was Caldera Cubeden 35.89%, La Cubed Pez Obrador 35.31%, a difference of 243,934 votes. Election monitors from the European Union stated on July 8 that they found no irregularities that could have affected the transparency of the results and that could have impacted the results. Other election monitors found many examples of fraud and irregularities and demanded a full recount. See also, Mexican General Election 2006 controversies. Earlier media reports had indicated that in two separate incidents, one in Ciudad Nezahualcóyotl and one in Tzalapa, used ballots and other electoral materials were found in rubbish dumps. Reformer later reported that this supposed electoral material was found to be photocopies and did not influence the election. Al Giordano, though, in a July 8 Narco News article, has a La Jornada photo of 3 completed color ballots found in a Mexico City trash can. Results by state, based on the official results of the Federal Electoral Institute, post-election controversy. Soon after it was clear that the official count would result with Felipe Caldera Cubeden ahead, Andrew copywriter Manuel La Cubed Pez Obrador stated that he and his party, the PRD, would fight for a vote-by-vote general recount. He presented 9 boxes and 900 pages of supposed evidence alleging mathematical electoral irregularities in 50,000 polling places to the Federal Electoral Tribunal. In addition, he claimed that in areas with large numbers of La Cubed Pez Obrador supporters, election officials nullified 900,000 votes. La Cubed Pez Obrador and his supporters began organizing mass protests, marches, and civil disobedience, culminating in a massive rally in Mexico City's historic Czar Cubed Carlo on July 30, 2006. Estimates of the crowd at the rally range from 500,000 to 3 million supporters. Additionally, La Cubed Pez Obrador's campaign has set up plantones, or encampments, inside the Czar Cubed Carlo and along Paseo de la Reforma, one of Mexico City's main arteries, for 47 days and slowing traffic for hours. The encampments were widely unpopular, as 65% of inhabitants in Mexico City opposed them. On Saturday, 5 August, the TEPJF met in public session to decide the outcome of La Cubed Pez Obrador's request for a recount. The 7 magistrates voted unanimously that there was only sufficient legal justification to order the recount of 11,839 ballot boxes in 155 districts, thus rejecting La Cubed Pez Obrador's public demand that all votes and ballot boxes be recounted. 86. The tribunal based its decision of a partial recount on its finding that, despite publicly demanding a vote-by-vote general recount, La Cubed Pez Obrador's party only presented legal claims to less than 44,000 polling stations, or less than 34%. Therefore, legally, only those 44,000 polling stations were deemed controversial by the TEPJF. The tribunal ruled that the non-controversial votes should not be recounted, because the certainty asked by the coalition is tied to the respect of the citizen counts in non-controversial polling stations. However, the tribunal did certify that principles of certainty in the elections called for a justified recount in some of the controversial stations, as irregularities were found. In the western state of Jalisco alone, 2,705 ballot boxes will be recounted due to evident mathematical errors. The state with the highest percentage of ballot boxes to be reopened is Aguascalientes with 436 or 35% of its 1,226 total ballot boxes. Other states with a high percentage of ballot boxes authorized to be opened include, Tamaulipas, 942 ballot boxes. Campeche, 170. Chihuahua, 727. Durango, 344. Nuevo León, 508. San Luis Potosi, 495. Sinaloa, 334. Yucatán, 228. Zacatecas, 221. Querétaro, 9.4%. States with small percentages include, Chiapas, 81 ballot boxes. Distrito Federal, 227. Estado de Mar Copyright Zico, 362. Michoacán, 300. Morelos, 124. Puebla, 194. Veracruz, 396. And Quintana Roo, 10. The recount commenced on Wednesday 9 August, and concluded on Sunday 13 August. Only after calculated the recounted votes will the TEPJF declare the candidate with the most votes as president-elect. On Friday, August 11, both disputing parties held press conferences, in which, despite the TEPJF's insistence that no recount results would be released until Sunday, each provided their own internal figures based on their observers in the recount. These figures clashed dramatically. According to the PAN, 75% of the votes had been recounted and the results confirmed that the initial count was perfect, with fewer than 3 errors per ballot box and no systemic bias. The coalition claimed that only 60% of the recount was complete, and that in this recount their party had gained an average of 29 votes per ballot box, 87. On August 28, the TEPJF announced the results of the partial recount, subtracting 81,080 votes for Caldera Cubed N, 76,897 votes for La Cubed Pez Obrador, 63,114 for Roberto Madrazo, 5,962 for Patricia Mercado, 2,743 for Roberto Campa, and 7,940 for the remaining candidates. A total of 237,736 votes were annulled out of the approximately 4 million votes recounted. That means around 6% of the recounted votes were annulled. Despite the tribunal's ruling, and despite the ruling being based on his party's decision of not contesting all polls judicially, La Cubed Pez Obrador continues to demand the vote-by-vote general recount, promising to continue civil disobedience and sit-ins. He was quoted as saying, "We don't want a portion of democracy. We want 100% democracy." 88, a day before the end of the recount, La Cubed Pez Obrador's coalition threatened with national mobilizations to prevent the imposition of Caldera Cubed N, if the PAN candidate was confirmed winner of the election. 89, calls for electoral reform. On Thursday, November 23, 2006, the European Union Election Observer Mission presented its final report. The report was generally positive and defended the official result of the July 2 presidential election, saying they reflect the legitimate will of the Mexican people. However, the report also expressed concerns and raised several criticisms, both general and specific, of the electoral process and the election. The report includes 48 specific recommendations for future reform to strengthen the electoral process, such as introducing random automatic recounts in the case of a close election, shortening the campaign period, considering the introduction of a two-round runoff system for presidential elections, and general clarifications in the electoral law. A November 24, 2006 article by the Herald Mexico reports, all of Mexico's major parties have called for reforms to electoral laws, including clearer limits on funding, greater transparency on campaign spending and a shorter campaign period. The article also reports, the EU mission, headed by Spanish Deputy José Copyright Ignacio Salafranca, said on Thursday that a runoff election would help the nation's electoral system, especially following results as close as this year's, when Felipe Caldera Cubed N beat André Copyrightus Manuel La Cubed Pez Obrador by less than a percentage point. In a news conference, Salafranca said that while a second round would be expensive, it would give greater democratic legitimacy to the result. Presidential candidates. There were 5 registered candidates for the 2006 presidential election. A non-registered candidate, Vicente González Torres, made a massive marketing campaign to enter the election, in spite of not being registered as an official candidate, and ran as a write-in candidate. His franchise slogan is the same, only cheaper, but his campaign one is to serve God and the people of Mexico. Ironically, he has frequently stressed the fact that he pays all of his own campaign expenses, thus being the cheapest candidate. He was not considered a formal candidate, but many press sources still publish his sayings and complaints against IFE, while some sources consider him a sort of comic relief. Summary: polls. Opinion polls in the run-up to the election showed La Cubed Pez Obrador and Caldera Cubed N neck and neck. The last polls conducted before the polling blackout that begins 8 days before the election all showed La Cubed Pez Obrador and Caldera Cubed N tied with the results within the margins of error. Both Reforma and El Universal newspapers, considered by many to be Mexico City's most influential, gave La Cubed Pez Obrador a 2-point edge over Caldera Cubed N. The candidates of the smaller parties also gained ground at the expense of Roberto Madrazo and La Cubed Pez Obrador. The last poll from El Universal showed Patricia Mercado of Social Democratic and Farmer Alternative had gained enough support for her party to retain its registry. In the latest Zogby poll, Madrazo, however, trailed the leader Caldera Cubed N by only 8 points and was only 4 points behind La Cubed Pez Obrador. Averaging the last 10 polls conducted before the polling blackout, La Cubed Pez Obrador edged out Caldera Cubed N by a razor-thin half percentage point with 35.1%. Caldera Cubed N had 34.6% and Madrazo came in third with 26%. Polls conducted by ARCOP and Covarrubias are internal polls, and generally not as reliable as the others. Assets, liabilities and annual expenses. As of January 2005, only 3 candidates had made a public declaration of assets, liabilities and annual expenses. These figures were given in pesos. The total value of assets of each candidate follows at an exchange rate of 10.62 pesos to $1. Presidential debates. A first presidential debate was held on April 25, 2006 with the presence of all candidates with the notable exception of La Cubed Pez Obrador. La Cubed Pez Obrador had refused to participate in all debates, and said he would only participate in one since long before the first debate was scheduled. The rest of the candidates agreed on leaving an empty chair to symbolize that the fifth candidate was indeed invited. The Silvacula became the topic of political commentary shows in the press. Exca copyright LSIO are called the empty chair a double-edged sword, coinciding with other publications and TV shows that leaving the empty chair could be construed as an insult to the audience and an attack to La Cubed Pez Obrador. However, by the date of the debates, the statistical tendency in many polls had confirmed Caldera Cubden at the second spot and La Cubed Pez Obrador still with a single-digit advantage over him. After the first debate, some political commentators, media outlets, and polls indicated that Caldera Cubden was seen as the winner of the debate, Mercado as the pleasant surprise of the night and Inervis Madrazo as the worst performer of the night. However, political analysts also said that the debate was unnecessarily full of promises and personal attacks. Analysts considered that La Cubed Pez Obrador was negatively affected by his absence, and polls later confirmed Caldera Cubden having replaced La Cubed Pez Obrador as the leading candidate. A second debate took place on June 6 of the same year, from 20:30 to 22:30, Central Time, with the confirmed presence of all candidates, including La Cubed Pez Obrador. Media outlets have given results to telephone polls applied post-debate showing a mixed tendency. Most, like Reformer and Present, gave Felipe Caldera Cubden the lead, but a few, like Diario Monitor, gave it to Andra copywriter Manuel La Cubed Pez Obrador. However, the rise of La Cubed Pez Obrador in voter preference polls since the debate seems to indicate that it was the PRD candidate who won it. One of the main causes for this victory may have been the Hildebranda accusation that La Cubed Pez Obrador made during the debate. Before the debate, Carlos Ayumada's wife threatened to release tapes involving allies of La Cubed Pez Obrador in suspected acts of corruption, but the release was cancelled due to an attempted murder which is still under investigation. Victor Gonzalez Torres, a national pharmacy entrepreneur nicknamed Dr. Smee, declared himself a non-registered write-in candidate and tried to enter the building where the debate was to take place. Gonzalez Torres demanded to be allowed participation in the debate, but he was not allowed to enter the building where he made the demand. He even brought his own chair. Candidates with no political parties are not permitted to compete in elections under Mexican law, and votes for all write-in candidates are counted together, regardless of which write-in candidate the vote was cast. Congressional election: 8 political parties participated in the 2006 congressional election to renew all seats in the upper and lower houses of Congress. In the current session of Congress, no party holds a majority. Preliminary results below are as of July 3, 2006, 41 UTC. Chamber of Deputies, Summary, Comparison, Senate, Summary, Comparison, Non-attached members, ran as part of slate. See also, full list of elections in Mexico in 2006, footnotes. External links: What's at stake in Mexico's election? Socialist Worker, preliminary election results. This is a constantly updated count of actual ballots as they are tallied into the electoral system. Not a survey, these are actual results. Opinion pieces on the election linked to the Council on Hemispheric Affairs, a think tank that has covered the 2006 presidential elections from Mexico. An analysis of Mexico's recounted ballots issue brief by the Center for Economic and Policy Research, August 2006. Mexico 2006 panel study.